Hi there, my name's Uzo Ehiog and I am an accredited strength and conditioning coach and also a specialist musculoskeletal physiotherapist in the UK. This video is brought to you in association with a rehab guru. So the aim of today's video is really to outline some aspects around the acute program variables as that pertains to rehabilitation of your patient. What we're going to do is we're going to take a deep dive into cluster sets. So what is a cluster set? So essentially, as I suggested, a cluster set is one of the acute program variables that we might use to manipulate someone's program. Often the variables that we use to manipulate a rehabilitation program are factors such as volume, intensity, load, reps and sets. So we're going to dive deep into sets. So what does a set do? So a set essentially, or a cluster set, allows us to alter the set configuration and also the structure, to achieve a specific stimulus, and therefore a physiological adaptation, which then allows us to do something else, in regards to that patient's program, so to improve their fortunes and their performance. The key thing about the cluster set is a cluster set is designed to maintain the movement velocity across the sets. But the first things first, we need to kind of understand, well, what is a set? So as I suggested, it's one of the acute program variables that you can change, to change essentially the outcome stimulus. So a set is essentially a series of repetitions which is often followed by some period of recovery. So why is this important? Well, we've got some research that suggests that essentially you need to be doing more than one set. Now, most of us know this, but there is some literature out there that suggests that, you can do one set and one set's okay for patients. Well, it might be, but you're not going to achieve very much. Let's be honest. If you only stick to one set, then what you're going to do is you're going to restrict essentially strength development, and also muscle hypertrophy development, for your patient. So most of the evidence really suggests that multiple sets demonstrates enhanced performance, both in athletes and also in non-athletes. Fundamentally, what the literature is kind of saying to us is, even if you've got someone who's untrained, and for our purposes, we can put patients into that untrained category, they're most likely to receive benefit, if you're doing between 3 to 4 sets. So essentially, the more sets you can give your patient that they're able to tolerate, of course, the greater the stimulus, for adaptation. So in the picture you can see there, you can see that essentially we've got some different set configurations. If you look at the first two, what you'll see is the traditional set. So the traditional set essentially is multiple repetitions followed by a interset rest. Essentially a long rest, after several repetitions. The cluster set is different because what it does is it puts a intra-repetition rest. So in between each repetition, there's a very short period of rest, to allow recovery to take place, and then you have your standard interset rest. So what is one of the key tenets essentially that underpins cluster sets? So essentially a cluster set allows the enhancement of movement velocity. So it allows the patient to maintain movement velocity. Why is movement velocity important? Well, it's important in regards to explosive strength training, and power training. And it's based upon physics, I guess, So movement velocity is associated with the rate of doing work. Whenever we do any exercise, whenever we do any resistance training, essentially what we're doing is we're doing quote unquote work. So work, in the colloquial term just means that you're moving weight from one place to another. That's exactly what we're doing. But if you think about it, your weight, the weight that the patient's moving, whether it's their body weight or it's an implement, it has a load, and we're going to move it a distance from point A to point B. And this is really important because from a physiological standpoint, work, is force times distance. Now, when we think about power and explosiveness, well, we use some of that equation from work because power is force times velocity, or force multiplied by velocity. So that now becomes quite important for us. because movement velocity is important for us, because we want to maintain movement velocity, because that's associated with power. Okay, so so what are the mechanisms? So how does the cluster set work? Well, essentially, if you think about it from this perspective, so the mechanisms, okay, that underpin the adaptations that we want at the end of the cluster set is this really, okay? Whenever we do any exercise, okay, we need to use our metabolism. Our metabolism, essentially, from a strength and power perspective, is all about, okay, the replenishment of ATP, so adenosine triphosphate, and also the replenishment of phosphocreatine. So what we know is that actually, if we limit the rest breaks, okay, in between each repetition, what that's going to promote is it's going to promote the production of lactic acid, and also it's going to reduce the rate of ATP resynthesis. So actually, we're not going to be in a position where we can develop large amounts of power and also develop high velocities, and because what we've done is we've restricted that, because actually the body's ability to resynthesize ATP and phosphocreatine has been diminished. So this is the underlying mechanism that allows it to take place. So the adaptations that we want essentially is, okay, in order to produce high rates of force and also produce those forces at high velocities, what we need essentially is what we're hoping the adaptations will be, okay, essentially is we want to promote increased neural drive. We want to essentially promote type 2 fiber activation. We want to increase motor unit activation. We want those high threshold motor units to be activated. We want an increase in that intermuscular coordination. And also we want to reduce some of that antagonistic activation, okay, from those muscles. But all of these things here can only take place if we're able to use high rates of force and also high velocities as well. And this is where the cluster set comes into its own, because it provides that rest break in between. So when should you use it, and on what patient should you use it, and at what stage of their rehabilitation? Well, the clinical applications are really quite clear. So if we're trying to improve explosive strength, okay, so that's strength speed or speed strength, okay, and explosiveness, then actually this is where cluster sets come into their own. The clinical applications are quite key really. So what we're talking about essentially is if you've got a patient, okay, and you're trying to return them back to change of direction tasks, so they're a team sports player, netball, volleyball, football, rugby, or something like that, where they need to change direction, so they need to apply high forces but really, really, really fast, then that, okay, then your cluster sets essentially are something which will be very, very beneficial for this group, okay, because it's going to allow them to maintain a high velocity and also to improve their explosive strength and to improve their power capacities essentially. If the goal is to improve maximal strength and muscle hypertrophy, then the research suggests that actually you're probably better off just sticking with the traditional set configuration, because it won't make that much of a difference, okay, for this particular group, okay, for numerous reasons. So how to use it? I guess the key thing here is you're probably going to have 1 to 2 KPI lifts, okay? So lifts which are your key performance indicators, or exercises which are your key performance indicator. And what I mean by that, essentially you're going to pick 1 to 2 exercises that you think are going to be beneficial, okay, for that particular patient, okay, to improve their explosiveness, okay? And it's probably going to fall in that middle to late stage of their rehabilitation. It's going to be these exercises which essentially are the most fatiguing, okay, and are probably the most technically demanding to get right. Okay, so that's going to be quite important. And what you'll see here up in this slide here. So here's an example, okay, of the power loss during both traditional sets, okay, and then what I've done essentially is I used an athlete, okay, and I got them to do some squat jumps, okay, and essentially what you can see is them doing some squat jumps here, and then what I used essentially a linear a linear accelerometer, which is here. These are relatively inexpensive, and they can be attached to either the patient, or they can be attached to the implement and the bar. And essentially what it measures is velocity and also power output. So what you can see is with the traditional set, okay, where I got the patient to jump, okay, multiple times, okay, you can see that actually there's about a 20% power loss, okay. Whereas actually then what I did is I got the athlete then essentially to jump, but then to keep the weight, okay, on their shoulders and to hold it for 30 seconds. Well, that increased their level of fatigue, okay, and also increased essentially, the amount of ATP and phosphocreatine they were using. And what you can see there is that there's a 47%, okay, power loss. Then what we did, okay, 5 minutes later, okay, there's 5 minutes in between each of these exercises, okay. I got the athlete essentially to do a squat jump, okay, and then to put the bar back on the rack, okay, and gave them a 10-second rest. And what we see is that there's a 7%, okay, power loss, okay, which is obviously less significant than the one before. Okay, then 5 minutes later, okay, the next condition, I got the athlete essentially, okay, to do one jump, okay, to rack the bar and then to take a 30-second rest. And what you can see is that actually the power loss is 0. Okay, so these cluster sets do work quite practically. So I do hope you found this helpful, and I guess what I would say is cluster sets should not be used with all patients, okay? There are times where cluster sets come into their own. It's normally going to be, okay, in that middle to late stage where you're trying to improve, okay, your patient's explosiveness, okay? Remember, it's only going to be 1 to 2 lifts or exercises, which are going to be your key indicators. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, okay? If you have, okay, please share it, and obviously, subscribe. Okay, subscribe to our website if you're interested in finding more about or learning more about strength and conditioning as it applies to clinical populations. Okay, don't forget, okay, you can try one of our face-to-face courses, or you can also try one of our online courses as well. Okay, integrated clinical strength and conditioning. Okay, the fundamentals. Okay, thanks for listening, and bye for now.